Next, we're going to talk about top stitching. And top stitching is using 1 or 2 rows of stitching along the top and bottom of your fabric. The most common reason I would use this would be if I'm making napkins or placemats or a table runner. What it does is it will hold your seam nicely. Another way you can use top stitching is if you're making a strap for a bag. It'll make the strap stronger if you've got your stitch lines on the strap. So we're going to pretend that we're making either a table runner or a placemat. I've sewn 2 pieces of fabric together, right sides together, and then I've ironed my seam, and I'm going to place my fabric with the seam next to my seam guide, and I've placed my seam guide at 1/2 inch. So my needle will be stitching 1/2 inch away from my seam. I'm going to again lower the presser foot, put my needle down. I'm going to do a back stitch. Again, kind of guiding the fabric with my hands and letting the feed dogs pull the fabric through, but kind of keeping a hold of both my layers. Again, I'll back stitch. Raise my needle all the way up, raise the presser foot, and then cut my threads on this first line of stitching. I also cut my threads at the beginning of the stitching also. So we've got our first line of stitching 1/2 inch away from my seam. Now we're going to make another row of stitching 1/4 inch away from the first stitch line. So it's going to actually divide in half your seam allowance. So on my machine, it's very hard to use the magnet seam guide for 1/4 inch. So what I have figured out that I need to do is I'm using this line on my presser foot. I'm lining it up with my 1/2 inch seam line, and when I do that, that will place my needle right in between the stitch line and the seam. So I'm going to do another back stitch. Again, I'm trying to keep this indented line here on the presser foot kind of even with my 1/2 inch seam line. When I get to the end, I'm going to back stitch. Raise my needle up, and I ran out of bobbin thread, and that will happen sometimes. What I'll need to do is just put more thread on my bobbin and continue down the rest of the top stitching. But you can see here it makes a nice decorative edge for whatever you're making, the placemat or table runner.